And during the course of the Q&A and during the course, which we're going to go through some really funny stuff that got talked about, the best was that one of the things that Juan Soto really liked about the Mets, I mean really liked, is that when asked, Steve Cohen said to Juan, I'll tell you right now, my plan is to win 2 to 4 World Series in the next 10 years. This is the plan behind the plan, because the original plan was to win a World Series in the first 3 to 5 years of his ownership. This is year 5. Well, it's funny how plans work, because when they don't work, you need a new plan, or you need to add on to an existing good plan, or you just realize you can't plan. But he couldn't resist. Juan Soto's ears percolated hearing 2 to 4 championships in the next 10 years. Yes, that would be a dynasty. Yes, that would be basically 6 to 8 years of being one of 29 losers. And wait a minute, it's a 15-year contract. I guess what Steve Cohen was acknowledging is that the 5 years when Juan Soto will be 37 to 41, it doesn't matter if they win a World Series. You don't need a 15-year plan with a 15-year contract. That would make too much sense. I was sort of shocked by that. Maybe 2 to 4 over 15 sounds worse than 2 to 4 over 10. You know, it would sound way better. I'd like to do the press conference over again. How about winning 2 to 4 world championships in the next 5 years during the prime of Juan Soto, and then just ignore the last 10? Maybe the final 10-year plan would be 0, but the first 5-year plan would be 4, which would make 4 and 15, which for a Mets organization, for any organization but the Yankees, would be amazing. It would actually give credibility to the nickname. Is that too subtle for people, Coca? I think people know the amazing Mets, the amazing plan. So they walk in to the press conference. Obviously, Scott Boras is sitting at the table next to Juan Soto. You got David Stearns there. You got Steve Cohen there. It was pointed out to us that Juan Soto had 30 family members and that the Mets were gracious enough to serve Dominican food. That is a chef's kiss of a touch when you're announcing your player to make sure that the spread will make everybody happy. Very important. About as important as a suite on the road. About as dispositive as speaking to your teammates or any players as you go through free agency. Do not be fooled by what you will read and hear today. What a big deal it was that Juan Soto has not spoken to any of his Yankee teammates since the postseason. That puts the norm in normal. These players, let me ask you to think about it this way. You work, many of you work, I believe according to analytics, about 82% of you work. Now, there's a bunch of students in there, and I appreciate that. When you're on vacation for a week and you shut down, are you calling all your workmates, your cubicle mate, your boss, hey, checking in, how you doing? Hey, Aaron, man, that was a tough loss. I'm sorry you dropped that ball. Don't you wish you could have kept it? Maybe Aaron Judge wanted to talk to Juan Soto about the ball that sold for $43,000 that he dropped in that fateful 5th inning. Or maybe Juan Soto had no interest in speaking to anyone on the Yankees because after a year, you just move on. After 5 years, very few teammates hang out. So they get to the press conference and they're answering questions, and Scott Boras couldn't resist when asked about the Yankees to give one of his beautiful answers when he said, hey, when you're at a wedding, you don't talk about the bridesmaids. Get it? Because the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Blue Jays and the Dodgers were bridesmaids. I was picturing immediately a wedding. I was just at a wedding this past weekend, a beautiful wedding. Congratulations to Adam and Amanda. And I was thinking about the teams walking down the aisle, and Juan Soto's standing there, not with his bride, but with Scott Boras, and they've locked hands. They're looking at each other's eyes, and the bridesmaids, in the form of teams, are walking down the aisle, and instead of throwing flowers like the cute flower people, they're throwing $100 bills and $1 million and years of contracts. Get to the front, right under the chuppah, and all of a sudden, Juan Soto looks at Scott Boras and says, I need a suite? Or he says, Scott, do you see my father-in-law right there, Steve Cohen? I want to make sure that he never gets divorced. That's another nugget that came out of the negotiation. This started with Ohtani. Scott Boras trying to copy Nez. Remember Ohtani's provision last year? Remind me, Coca, because when I say that, I'm just delaying. I believe that Ohtani has an opt-out if Andrew Friedman ever is not the president of baseball operations, and, it's either an and or an or, conjunction, junction, what's your function? Or Mark Walter is not the managing general partner, which, of course, is an absurd provision to have. But it turns out that Juan Soto... This is great. Juan Soto meets Steve Cohen. They're negotiating. He gets $765 over 15. He goes to his $32 million Beverly Hills mansion. I won't give you the address because I don't want it to be burglarized while Steve is at one of his other homes for under 180 days. And he says, Steve, I'm so happy. I love you as the owner, and Alex is taking care of the family so well. I only want to be here if you own the team. Is that in the contract? It's not in the guarantee provision. They added as a clause. There's an opt-out, but the contract is with the partnership that owns the Mets. Steve Cohen owns that partnership. Do you write it as a legal statement? That if at any point the partnership decides to sell the Mets, that such player shall opt out, which means that if you want to buy the Mets, you have to talk to Soto and say, are you going to opt out? What if Steve Cohen gets, God forbid, what if he stops enjoying it? What if he realizes that he's writing checks for no reason and the 10-year plan is a 10-year plan filled with futility, filled with losses? Forget championships, it's filled with surus. And it turns out that Juan Soto actually doesn't love him. He actually only wanted the money.